bad, I'm back, I guess. Well, it's been a year, so it's been a while. Last time I had just gotten married. I survived, obviously. At least 1 year so far. As Tina made a point to point out that Jacci survived also. It's not one-sided, as many of you know. And yeah, neither of us would be here, though, if it wasn't for God. And it's not anything that I do or that she does, but the fact that we have Him to focus on helps us get through the times when I freak out about the future or she freaks out about the future. So it's nice to have that foundation, that's for sure. So last time I was here, do I need to give a test and see who remembers what I spoke about? I focused a little bit on Ecclesiastes, that nice uplifting book that talks about how life is meaningless and everything you do is meaningless. As Solomon was trying to figure out what is the purpose and meaning of life. And he eventually ends it in the very last bit. Then you get that hope that, you know, the purpose of life is to obey, fear, and love the Lord, and basically to follow God, right? The purpose of life isn't to work. The purpose of life isn't to have fun or have a good time. It's to fear God and to follow God. So, you know, that's such a nice, light subject to talk about. I thought I would maybe bring one that was a little easier, right? So this week we're talking about, or this time we're talking about heaven and hell, and salvation. So, you know, I like a challenge, I guess. So I'll start out with a few verses that kind of give us a picture of heaven, and we'll see that it's not floating on a cloud with a harp and singing music all day. These mainly come from Isaiah, but I also have one from Revelation. So we start in Isaiah chapter 11. It speaks about the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. So already we are correcting the idea that the lion will lie down with the lamb. Has anybody heard that before? Yeah, that's not actually in the Bible. So it's the wolf will live with the lamb. But that the idea is the same though, right? The wolf is not going to eat the lamb. And the lion is not going to eat the calf or the little child that is hanging out with all of them, right? There's not going to be any more death or suffering, anything else to worry about any longer. It continues, the cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jacci, that would be Jesus, will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his place of rest will be glorious. Now, the place that we hear here is not up in the clouds somewhere, right? It's speaking of earth, like the holy mountain, and that the waters will be there. You know, the earth itself will be full of the knowledge of the Lord. So then we jump ahead to Isaiah 65. Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. Now here when it says new heavens, it's generally speaking more of the concept of sky and universe, everything that's above us basically, right? Not necessarily the idea that we think of as heaven sometimes. And a new earth. So basically the whole of creation will be new. The former things, which would be the things we're in now, right? This present world, the present universe, the former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create, for I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. And then a few verses later, the wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox, but dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. And then the Revelation reference comes from Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To him who is thirsty I will give to drink without cost from the spring of the water of life. He who overcomes will inherit all this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. So, when it speaks of the second death, see, it's such a lovely topic, right? Talk about dying. We're all going to die someday. Fact of life, fact of death, I guess you could say, right? And it's not something to fear. It's going to be the main point I want to get to eventually. But for right now, if we look at Hebrews 9 briefly for a second, 9:27 is when in the Bible it says, just as man is destined to die once, so we will all die once someday. And after that, to face judgment. So we'll die, and then next thing you know, we're in front of God and we're going to be judged. So the next verse says, Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many people, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. And these are all things we know from Sunday school, right? That Jesus died to save us, to give us salvation. But what is that salvation, right? What is he saving us from? And we might say sin, but I want to hopefully provide a greater understanding of what it really is that he's saving us from and what that salvation really means. What are we getting in the deal? And I think too often we don't really directly think about that and how exciting that should be. When we read Paul in the New Testament, he seems pretty excited to die and get to heaven someday. And then at the same point, though, while he's still on earth, he knows he's got a job to do, and he's willingly accepting that. So he doesn't go out and take his own life just so he can get to be with God in advance. He knows that God still has a purpose for his life. And while he was alive, he continued to do what God was telling him to do. But he knew that there was something great coming. And so in the verses I read earlier, it speaks to the fact that God himself will be with us, with all the people, right? And so it's not the idea that we're going to go up to some pearly gates somewhere and St. Peter's going to be there to greet us and let us in. It's a matter of God comes down to a new earth. He brings his holy city where he's going to dwell. In the very beginning, when he created Adam and Eve, everything was perfect. He had a garden that they were tending, and they were able to walk with him in the garden and be in his holy presence, right? Experience his complete love, touch him, hold him, hug him, get comfort from him, love him, and have him love them in return, right? Everything was complete and everything was perfect until Adam and Eve rebelled, right? They disobeyed God, and that broke everything. And that's the world we live in now, right? A world that used to be perfect was completely destroyed by water. Peter speaks to this nicely in 2 Peter. He goes through a summary of the fact that the world was perfect and it was broken, and then it became really, really bad. God destroyed it with water. He used salvation in that case through Noah and his ark, and he saved 8 people from which we all come, right? We're all related here. So the reunion will be next week, right? Everybody will get together. But we're all brothers and sisters of God. We're all sons and daughters of God. And that concept comes from the fact that we all trace our descendants back to Adam, and Adam is called the Son of God because God created him in the beginning. And that's where we get that from. And so can you imagine that personal relationship with God? I mean, we talk about that nowadays, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? I mean, that's a little different when we talk about that, but I'm talking about being able to go home and sit down and just across from the table there's God your Father, right? And you're able to talk with him and, ask him questions and try to understand them better. You have all of eternity to get to know him more and completely and try to know him as best you can. And if that's a figure of how big he is, the fact that you have eternity, you may still never know him as much as somebody else may know him in heaven. Everybody has the opportunity to get to know him better, to explore the new world, right? To see all the animals perfect again, to see all the plants and the world itself all perfect again, and we'll still have dominion over that. We'll still need to tend it in some way and be responsible for it. But there won't be any more crying and tears and being able to get hurt and bit by animals and stuff. They'll be there to and joy, right? You can probably ride on a dinosaur or, maybe stuff like that without having to worry about getting crushed or eaten. And so a better picture of this, or maybe to understand more fully, is when we talk about who God is, right? We speak of the fact God is fill in the blank, right? The common thing is God is love. You've heard that one before, I'm sure. The easiest way to get a picture of what it would mean to know God or be of God would be to look at His Word in Galatians 5:22, when it speaks of the fruits of the Spirit, right? Because it's talking about the fact that if God is in your life, or if you're with God, you're going to show these fruits, right? And that means that God is dwelling in you. A little bit of Him is going to peek out. Well, this is a little bit of what we would expect from God, is some of these fruits, which the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So if we're dwelling with God, we're going to have all those things completely and fully. We're going to have complete love better than anything we've ever known on earth, right? A lot of times love on earth means, well, I'll love you if I get something out of it, right? Like to have and to hold till death do us part, for good and for bad. Our love may be good, but it's not perfect, right? Some days she has to love me just because we're married. It works the other way around too. But imagine that perfect. Imagine if you didn't have to try to earn the love of somebody, right? Imagine if your kids would love you their entire life and not just when they're really little, before they hit the rebellious teenage years. Or imagine that you think your parents are smart your entire life, instead of later on when you learn from your own mistakes that, oh yeah, they knew what they were talking about. It's that kind of thing. But so you'll have complete love. There'll be complete joy. There'll be complete peace. No more wars, no more fighting, no more turmoil. Complete kindness, complete goodness, all those things. Complete self-control, right? There won't be anybody running around acting like a fool. But now the contrast to that, though, so that's more what heaven would be. Heaven is more like being in the presence of God. We're going to be on a new earth, brand new, perfect again, this time not broken. And everybody will be there. It'd be like as if Adam and Eve didn't screw up in the beginning, if they hadn't rebelled against God, and they still had all their children. It would be like that perfect world with all their children. So imagine that. Try to imagine that perfect reality. It's probably too hard to imagine. A lot of this kind of comes out of this whole topic in general, and this brief touch on heaven and hell kind of comes out of my work with the Vacation Bible School this summer. I had the privilege again to work for the Park River Bible Camp, and as a part of that, they usually have me doing Vacation Bible School. So last year I did 8 of them, which is kind of rough, but you get to know a lot of kids and you get to know the material pretty well. But the things we were focusing on last year were God and Jesus, as always. We were talking about how God provides, and we were learning about Jesus providing the bread and the fish, multiplying the loaves, feeding the 5,000, and God providing bread and quail in the desert to the Israelites, and things like that. So we did those were our main lessons, but we also were touching on some of the catechism lessons from church, right? We were talking about some of the Apostles' Creeds, the first 2 parts of the Apostles' Creed. So we talked about God the Father and Creator, and we talked about Jesus and all the things that He did in the second article. And then we also were talking about the 10 Commandments as one of our lessons. And when you start talking about all those things with the kids, big things come up, right? You get the questions about heaven, you get the questions about hell, you get the questions about sin, and what does all this stuff mean? And it's not like you can go get some big book and say, okay, kids, here, read this book, or you got to be able to simplify, right, so they can understand. God's word is meant to be understood and simple. He says, let the children come to me, not so He can bore them to death, or hours and hours of dissertations about what does life and death mean. So to put it simply, we talked a little bit about how great it'll be to be in God's presence, right? God is light. You hear that analogy in the Bible. God is light, and sin is kind of like darkness. So if this room was completely dark, if it was just filled with us and God wasn't here, and so it's just sin in this room, and I turn a flashlight on here, up here, and that's God, right? God is that light. Wherever God exists, Wherever that light exists, the darkness has completely ceased. And that's why God can't be with us today, right? That's why he can't physically come down here and give us a hug. Because if he did that, we would be obliterated, we would be killed, dead instantly because of our sin. He can't exist where sin is. Sin can't exist where he is. They're completely separated. In the same way that heaven and hell would be completely different areas. They can't, God doesn't go walking in hell, and people from hell don't get out and can't go up and be near God, right? Can't be in his presence. And that's the point I kind of want to get across, is us to appreciate what that really means. So, if God is love, and God is peace, and God is joy, and God is here, and that's heaven, all right, we get over here, and then we have a problem. First of all, it's a lake of burning fire. The Bible does speak about that. So it's kind of like, if jail, but only if the jail was on fire and you can't get out. So that's bad enough as it is, right? But amplify the fact that, well, if God is love and he's over here, well, then what's over here? Well, there is no love over here because love is God. God can't exist there. So there's no love. There'll be no joy. There'll be no peace. There'll be no self-control. There'll be no goodness. There'll be no hope, right? There'd be no hope that things were ever going to change. An eternal separation from God. The best picture we can really get of that would be what Jesus suffered on the cross. When you look in Matthew and you look in Mark, it speaks to the fact that noon that day when he is crucified. And this is after he's already been beaten the whole night before, right? And then they put him up on the cross. Noon that day, he's suffering along there. And the land gets dark. It speaks of the land getting, a darkness comes over the city at least. Who knows? Whole world, we don't know. But the darkness is covering the area from noon until 3 o'clock. So it's not just a few minutes. It's for 3 hours. And then it says at about 3 o'clock, Jesus, that's when he calls out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's ultimately at that point, at that time frame, whether it's just that moment or that whole 3 hours, it's at that point that God is taking the punishment for our sin, or that God and Jesus is taking the punishment for our sin. Because when he says he's forsaken him, that's literally God has turned his back on Jesus at that point. Jesus is completely by himself on that cross. He is experiencing a complete lack of God's love, a complete lack of God's joy, a complete lack of God's peace. The punishment that we're meant to have because we're all guilty, right? Last time I was here, I spoke to that a little bit, talked about the Ten Commandments. That's God's rule mark. That tells us whether or not we are good or bad. And we're all bad. We've all failed that. Myself, guilty. You haven't always put God first. You steal, you lie. We've broken all of those. My wife as well. Not my mother-in-law. She's perfect. But the point is that Jesus at that moment, he was in hell. He was on the cross. He wasn't physically like in the lake of burning fire, but he was in hell. There was no hope. There was no peace. There was no love. There was no joy. At that moment, he did not know God any longer. He was separated from the Father, from everything that is good. If you could imagine that, So the next time you read through the crucifixion, you read through what Jesus did for you. I mean, just imagine that's the punishment that we were meant to take. That's the punishment that everybody gets. And, you either accept that and you end up there and you deal with that and you don't have God's love and you end up in what we call hell. Or you get to be in heaven with God. And we'll talk about that a little further in a moment. But I mean, just think about that, and I'm hoping that picture is a little bit easier to understand. What is it that Jesus actually saved us from? And that salvation that he gives us, it's not as much as, yes, sin is what causes us to experience that, but he's saving us from that. He's saving us from jail, from that punishment. That's the bigger thing that he's saving us from. And that's significant. If I thought my wife was going to go there, my love for her should want me to express and do whatever I can to make sure she doesn't go there, to never be separated from God. And I wanted to make that more real, because too often we get distracted by the things in our life, the everyday things we need to do, right? To work, make money, buy food, clothing, vacation, going back to school, all those things, they're distractions that help that take us away and guide us away from remembering what is the actual importance and purpose to life. This world isn't perfect. We don't want to stay in this world forever. We should be looking forward to when we're going to die someday, because we want to get to that perfect world. We want a new world. We don't want to have to remember, 40 years I worked 40 hours a week slaving away. Or we don't want to have to remember all the taxes I paid, or all the hot summers and unbearable winters. All those things will be a former thing. It'll be destroyed, a former memory, no longer. We'll be in a perfect place. We'll be in perfect love. So there's that. Now, again, like I said, I was speaking to children. So you want to try to give them analogies that they can understand a little better. So I'll try to share that here. Maybe, think about the fact that, like I said in Hebrews, you're going to die, and then you face the judgment. So, here's your courtroom. God and Jesus, they're up there. Jesus gets to judge you, right? And God's got his standard. He's got the 10 Commandments out. Satan's over there. He's like the prosecuting attorney, right? He's calling out all your sins. He's making sure God doesn't overlook any of them. That time that you didn't follow God, or that time you stole answers, you cheated off somebody's test, right? You were stealing their answers. That time that you looked lustfully on a woman or a man, that time that you thought really bad thoughts about somebody. Jesus says that's like murdering them in your heart. All those things, we break them constantly because of our sinful nature. So there's no way we can get up there and say, hey, I'm a good person, because it's just not right. And Satan's there to make sure that we can't get out on that technicality. Now, our God is a God of justice and mercy, right? And so his heart is he wants us all to be saved. He loves us all. He created us all. He doesn't want any of us to just be thrown away. But at the same time, for him to be righteous and just, he has to have that standard, and he has to hold to it. There has to be consequences for actions. Otherwise, if he says, here's your get out of jail free card all the time, then that standard gets broken, right? If a meter isn't always a meter, then the building's not going to be square. And that's just it. God has said, this is how, this is what perfection looks like. This is what you should be doing. You weren't able to do that. You have to be punished. There has to be a consequence for that. And so we get up there, and that's just it. We're all found guilty, every single one of us, in this room, in the world, who has lived before and will live after us. They're all condemned. And so then the problem is, God has to punish you. So then the verdict comes out. You're going to be sent to the lake of fire. You're going to be separated from me and my son forever, for eternity. And it's at that point that, you just imagine feeling that. Imagine what Jesus must have felt like on the cross when he was separated from God. That's what you're going to be facing. But then the nice thing, though, is what happens is Jesus steps down from the bench as judge, and he comes up, taps you on the shoulder, and say, hey, if you will allow me to, I will take your punishment for you. And that's really the only thing that we need to do. We just accept that, okay, I'll stay here, and you go away and take the punishment for me. Which, when we think about it, if we were to fast forward to that moment, and you had you had a Christian and an atheist, and they're both in that situation, right? And a Christian, who wouldn't accept that, right? Who wouldn't take that? But the atheist really, in his mind and in his heart, is saying, no, I'm going to take, I'm doing this on my own. I'm good. You don't exist. I can do this on my own, and that seems ridiculous. That we just need to accept that Jesus does that for us. That he's punished. He's suffered that for us already in history, so that we don't have to. And it's that act that makes our God merciful and loving. In the same way, a mother or a father or a good friend would, I'm sure, much rather, if their child or the friend was going to suffer or be killed, a good friend or a good parent would be the one that would say, no, take me instead. And we see a little bit of that in our world when we see people sacrifice their lives for others. And, God even speaks of that in his word, that, a good friend is one who will lay down his life for another. But here's another thought to wrap up and finish here, is that in Matthew 5, Jesus says this. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that?" So I challenge you to remember that there isn't anybody who isn't your relative. You know, we all human beings come from Adam and Eve, Noah and his sons, and ultimately from God. We need to remember that we're all valuable. God created each of us. And it's hard to do that sometimes, because sometimes people can be jerks. They can be really bad, evil people in the world. But you know why they're that way? It's because they don't have God, right? They don't have love, they don't have peace, they don't have patience. And they can't, if they've turned their back on God already, and if they're not yet in hell, they're on earth, there's still that chance that you could be the person to help to get them to God, right? It's our duty to not only follow God, but to also share Him and what He's done for us and what we have to look forward to with our neighbor, with our family members who maybe don't know who God is, with the strangers we bump into sometimes. If you're traveling or something, it's an easy way to meet somebody who you don't have normal contact with, that they might not know. Maybe God put you in that situation for that reason. So I pray that you be challenged by that maybe this makes it a little more real to you, and that when you leave here today and the other 167 hours of the week that you're not sitting in church, that you're thinking about what God did for you, what you have to look forward to. Think about the incomplete love we have now, and how much better it's going to be in the future that we want to look forward to. And try to do your best to bring more people into that family, bring more people to God. So, with that, I'll close in prayer and I'll turn it back over. Lord, I thank you for the privilege to share your word. I thank you that you use me and allow me to be used by you. I pray that you continue to bless this church, that you give these people your love and peace and hope for the future. I pray that you give them boldness and strength and courage to speak to their fellow men and women who need to know about you, Lord. I pray that this has bolstered and increased their faith in you, and that I pray that we all appreciate more fully what you've done for us each day. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray these things. Amen.